do better than that. So, you tell me your stories, and where am I? You are the tinker, I'm not the tailor. I'm not the soldier, I'm not the rich man. You said, keep the sailor. Tell me a story of adventure then. Tell me the story of a sailor which includes my life, not the life my father would have for me. There is a city, my lord, in the middle of Flanders. Gent van de Drie Toren. Ghent of the Three Towers. It is on the River Lea, and on one side of the river are the three towers. St. Nicholas Kirk, the Belfort, and St. Baf's Cathedral. And on the other side of the Lea is where the poor people live, my lord. And a lot of the property on the other side of the river, a lot of the land used to be owned by the church. And of course it was owned by the church. This is where the poorest housing was. This is where the poorest people lived, where the criminal classes lived, and where the lowest taverns were. In fact, because it was owned by the church, it was called, and indeed is called today, the parental, which means the monk's arse. And so a young sailor, young, was in the monk's arse, seeking a low tavern, and he found the low tavern he was looking for, and he went in, and he sat down, and he saw his friends, and he sat with them, and they sat in a circle in a tavern where only men meet, and they do not look each other in the eye, but they look furtively side to see if they can make contact with one person. And then Jan realizes that there is a man who is not sitting with his head down, not making eye contact with anyone. There is someone sitting with his arms stretched out on a bench, looking round the room as if he owns it, dressed in fine silks. And this man smiles at Jan and nods. Jan quickly looks away and goes back to his friends, but soon the barman gives him a drink from the stranger. So Jan takes his drink and goes and sits by the stranger, who smiles at Jan, and they chink glasses. Gezondheid. And they make eye contact, because if you do not make eye contact when you chink your glass and say gezondheid, that means 7 years bad sex. Now, this is a tavern where men do not look at each other. It is certainly a tavern where men do not tell each other their names. And yet the stranger says, I am Renard de Vos. And you, young man, interest me. You should come to my home. I have a castle just outside the city. Come to my castle and you will see my fine gardens in the English style. Come in through the main door and you will see the fine Italian marble floor. Come up the stairs and you will see my collection of Dresden china displayed, and then come into the room at the top of the stairs and come and see the Brussels tapestry that hangs over my bed. Jan was a young man, but not a foolish man. And so he apologised that tonight was not the night for visiting. He promised to be with his friends. He'd been to sea for quite a while. He needed to catch up with news. And so they made a date the next night in the bar in the Patersaal. Jan made sure that he left before Renard de Vos. And he went to the stables and fetched his horse, and then he just waited in the shadows until he saw Renard de Vos leave the tavern. Did I just say leave the tavern? Sorry, swagger from the tavern to the stables and fetch his horse and proudly ride his horse along the Lea over St. Michael's Bridge, up through the city, past St. Baf's Cathedral and out towards Larne. And as he went towards Larne, he did not realise that in the shadows behind him there was another horse, and Jan was following him. And in the village of Larne, he saw there was a castle. Larna Castle. So this was Reynard de Vos's home. And so he saw Reynard de Vos go in through the gates of the castle, and Jan stepped down from his horse, tethered his horse, and looked round, and he could see into the garden. And in the garden, yes, it was a fine English garden, and he saw Reynard de Vos going round the castle. He crept into the garden, but as he crept into the garden, he noticed there was a sign over the garden which said, "Be bold." He went into the garden, creeping from bush to bush, hiding so that he wouldn't be seen. And then he heard horses' hooves. Reynard de Vos had simply come home to change horses and was leaving. And so he waited until de Vos had left, and then he crept up to the castle. De Vos had left the main door open. And so he went in through the main door and noticed that chiselled into the stone over the door it said, "Be bold, but not too bold." And he went into the great hall, and there was a marble Italian floor, and there was a staircase, and displays at the staircase of Dresden china. And so he went up the staircase, and there were tapestries lining the walls, but those were not the tapestries he was interested in. He wanted to see one Brussels tapestry, the tapestry that hung over Reynard de Vos's bed. And so he went to the room and put his hand on the door handle, and he noticed that cast into the metalwork of the door handle were, "Be bold, but not too bold, lest your blood should run cold." He opened the door and saw the bed. A beautiful oak four-poster bed with a Brussels tapestry hung over it and hanging down the back, and then surrounding the bed, covering the floor, were the dismembered limbs of the young men that Reynard de Vos had tempted to his house. Jan stifled a scream and stepped backwards out of the room. He closed the door behind him, but then he heard horses' hooves and screams and shouts. Quickly, he hung behind one of the tapestries hanging on the wall, and then he heard the door of the castle open, and the screams get louder, and he looked from behind the tapestry, and he saw Reynard de Vos pulling a young man up the stairs towards the room. They reached the top of the stairs, and Reynard de Vos noticed on the young man's finger there was a diamond ring. And while the young man was still screaming, de Vos tried to pull the ring from his finger, but the ring was stuck. It wouldn't come off. So de Vos took his knife and cut the young man's hand from the living flesh. The hand flew up into the air in an arc of blood and landed on the floor, where it slid under the tapestry where Jan was waiting. De Vos obviously had lost interest in the duel and simply opened the bedroom door, pushed the young man in, closed the door behind him, and soon the screaming stopped. Jan leant down and took the severed hand and put it in his jacket. When all was quiet, he made his way down the stairs, past the Dresden china, across the beautiful Italian marble floor, and out through the laid-out English gardens of Larna Castle, and he made his way home. He had a date in the Paterson with Reynard de Vos. And so he was there with his friends waiting when Reynard de Vos walked in, and de Vos smiled and bowed to him. And Jan said, "Reynard de Vos, you are welcome, but come and sit with my friends. Let me introduce you to them. These are my friends, and my friends, this is Reynard de Vos, and he is a fine man who owns a fine castle, and he has filled my dreams. For last night I had a dream. I dreamt that I went to Reynard de Vos's castle, And I went into his fine English gardens, and as I went in, I passed through an arch, and over the arch it said, "Behold." And De Vos looked at him and said, "It was not so. It is not so. It will never be so." But Jan continued. And I went up to the castle door, and I pushed open the castle door, and I went into the castle, passing under stone in which there was inscribed the words, "Behold, but not too tall." And I went across the beautiful Italian marble floor, and up the stairs past the Dresden china, and I came to the room at the top of the stairs, and I put my hand on the door handle, and in the metal work it said, "Behold, but not too cold. Let your blood run cold." And De Vos said, "It is not so. It was not so. It will never be so." And Jan said, and I opened the door, and there was a beautiful Brussels tapestry over his bed, surrounded by the severed limbs of the young men he had slaughtered. And De Vos said, "It is not so. It was not so. It will never be so." And Jan said, "Oh, but it is so." And he held the severed hand out before De Vos. His friends fell upon the monster and pulled him to pieces. And then they decorated the surface of the Ley River with his limbs. Tinker, tailor, soldier, sailor, rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief. "You're a thief, storyteller," said the prince. "You've taken a story and twisted it because you want to make me into a monster. That if I will be who I am, then I must inevitably become a monster." And the storyteller said, "My lord, I am a thief and I am a beggar. I claim other people's stories. I steal them and I make them into something new. That is what storytellers do, my lord. And you know from fairy tales, my lord, that men can be monsters. And sometimes the monsters can be tamed, and sometimes they cannot be tamed. Why should your world be any different from theirs?"